Yiboneh, Yiboneh HaMikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh HaMikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Neshama shir chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. Welcome home to Torah. A very, very warm welcome. We're in Parashat Behaloscha. I know in the Chutz La'aretz you guys are behind 1 week for a while, but we're in chapter 10 of Numbers, verse 29. I think that I'm going to title this class, What Every Jew Needs to Know About Conversion or Converts, especially since we're dealing with, in the middle of Behaloscha, right, towards the end of chapter 10, verses 29 through 32. It's not the very end, but it's near the end. All of a sudden, we're introduced to the idea that Moshe is requesting from his father-in-law Yisro, one of the most well-known, it's controversial whether he actually converted or not, but we're going tonight with the idea that yes, he did convert. Okay, one of the most well-known, famous converts. In fact, one of the portions of the Torah is even named after him, which we're going to deal with his name. Okay, we're going to deal with his name tonight. That if you read the verses, you'll see that Moses calls him Chovev. Chovev, Chovav. He spoke to Chovav. Chovav is based on Chovev, which means loving and endearing. Okay, so Yitro is a language of somehow extra, an appendage, not necessarily part of. Whereas Chovev, right, Chovev, he calls him the Chovav. Chovav is a more endearing, loving name. So let's begin. First of all, I want to mention, for those who are not familiar with what we do here, is we use the Yakar as the basis for our discussion. So of course there are many other meanings to the verses we're reading. There are deeper meanings, there are various meanings, but this, what we deal with, is one of what we'll call fundamentals, that every person should know at least the pshat, the explanation of the Yakar, because he unravels Rashi, he unpacks the Midrash, and he's explaining the verses on a grammatical, right? Something very particular to the words that are used and how they're used. So it's a great way to learn Hebrew. So I encourage those to go deep down into the description box. There's a link where you could pick up the Hebrew sheets. Now, if you're really interested in the English sheets and you want to be on my emailing list, my private emailing list, then shoot me an email asking to be on the English sheets so you can follow the source sheet, the source sheet material a little bit more in a better fashion than not haphazard, right? Having to look up every verse or every medrash or every Gemara or whatever source that is being quoted from the Yakar. So that's number one. Number two, down below you'll also find links to other or previous classes on that parsha, as well as other great speakers that we have on Yiboneh. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're in chapter 10, verse 29, and I'll read the whole verse in English and then in Hebrew. Then Moses said to Chovav, the son of Ruel, the Midianite. Now, we don't know at this point that it's Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, but right away the verse tells us it's Moses' father-in-law, which has a different name. And we're traveling. He's telling Yisro that we're about to travel to Eretz Yisrael. Nosim anachnu. We are traveling. El mocham asher amar Hashem ito etein lechem. Right? About the land which the Lord spoke about, that I'm going to give it to you. And then he says, Locha itanu. Walk with us. Come with us. Go with us. We're going, and we want you to go with us. However, in the Hebrew, notice nosim was the first word when it says we're traveling, or I like the word journeying. We're journeying, and you'll see why, as opposed to just moving or going. Whereas later when he says, come with us, l'chayitanu, meaning walk with us, go with us, and he says, it's like a promise. The hetavnu loch, we will be good to you, or it will be good to you. What will be good to you? To come with us. For the Lord has spoken of good fortune for Israel. Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. Now that's the first verse. If we go down to verse 30 through 32, I want to point out a few things that we will discuss. So Yisro responds, I'm not going to go. But he uses the word lo elech, which is related to the word lecha. Okay, that I'm not going to go. I'm not going to walk with you. I'm not going to travel with you. But where will I travel? Where will I go? For I will go to my land and my birthplace, meaning he's heading back to Midian. So in the Hebrew he says, Ki im el artzi el moladiti elech. But to my birthplace, my land and my birthplace, that's where I'm going to olech. I'm going to go. Moses is begging him to a certain extent. He says, please don't leave us because you're familiar with our encampments in the desert. Now you may think, just from reading this person could turn out to be what? Part of a fifth column. I mean, if ever is not with us, he'll be against us, and he knows how we work, how we sleep, where we are at. I don't think so. I don't think so. In fact, we'll see what it really means when it says that you are familiar with our encampments. In the Hebrew it says, Al ken yedata chanotenu. Okay, you like intimately know our encampments. It's true, but you know it, that we're in the desert. But then it says, Vahiyita lanu le'einenu. I'm sorry, le'einayim. That you will be our eyes. Right? If Yisro was like a Bedouin, he would be a great guide. Right? You'll be our guide. You know the terrain of the desert? That's not what it means. That's what we think it means at first. Then we will bestow on you the good which God grants us. What is the second promise that Moses is trying to give him that is a greater promise than the first promise in verse 29? In other words, verse 29 did not convince him, oh yeah, it's going to be good for you, or we will be good to you. Somehow that was not convincing enough to get him to come, but perhaps if we tell him we will bestow on you the good which God grants us, that somehow is a addition, some added factor that Moses did not use in the first attempt that will convince him, or hopefully convince him in the second, we'll call it a promise. Okay. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this already because I spoke to you guys before we started that we were about to enter the land of Israel, and converts do not get a piece of the land, a piece of the real estate. However, as I mentioned, that when you marry, a woman marries a man, then she will be a part of his estate, and her female children will certainly marry other Jews, and they will get part of the real estate. And it'll just be unfortunate for the men for a few generations until their daughters intermarry. But the truth is, you can always rent, and there's always place for you. Okay, so don't be dismayed. That could have been part of why Chovav was dismayed. It could be, because that's how the Parsha develops. And at this point, he tries to convince his convert father-in-law to join. Why now? Okay, so let's start with the Yakar. And we're on page Taf Kuf Peitet. And it's Kaf Tet. In other words, halfway down that first page. It says 29. L'cha itanu ve'hetavnu loch. Right? Go with us and we will treat you well. Right? We're going to be good to you. So the Yakar points out right away, Kan shoalim hamaforshim. The commentators questioned. They had a question. They were bothered. What are they bothered about? Me'acha shelo nitrotza yitro leilech imehem b'havtacha rishona. After the fact that Yitro was not appeased, he wasn't willing to go with them after the very first promise, which we saw in 29, right? We will be good to you. Ma hoisif lo Moshe. So what exactly did Moses add? Kisha'amar lo shenit, when he repeated, I'm using the word repeat, he didn't repeat the exact same promise, but when he repeated, when he gave over a second time, a type of a promise in verse 32, where he said, then we will bestow on you the good which God grants us. Now, I don't want to go into any of the answers. I want to list. Here's like 4 or 5 good questions. This is the beauty of the Kli Yakar. He wants us to really become familiar with the terminologies that are used, with the inconsistencies or the anomalies or the most logical questions, and then only then will he attempt to answer. So that's the first question. The second question he asks, V'od lama karu chovav akshav. Why is Moses right now calling him, which we know is Yisro, right? He's the father-in-law of Moshe. Why is he calling him Chovav? What does that name symbolize, and why is he calling him that now? Next question. It does say, Noisim anachnu, in verse 29. Moses says, we are traveling. But then he says at the end of that verse, in 29, L'cha itanu, travel with us. Now, it's different. In English, let's say, journey with us, or we're journeying, and basically come with us. So there's, in other words, a description by us as journeying. When it comes to you, chovav, you are being requested to take that physical walk. Maybe I'm giving some of it away here. Walk with us. So the Kli Yakar says, it could have been the other way around. It could have said, we're walking, and we want you to travel with us. In other words, I think he's emphasizing the idea there has to be a distinct difference in the Hebrew between noisim and halicha. So he just says, Hailolomar holchim anachnu, oh, sayitanu. So obviously the verbiage, the words used were very distinct. And so he wants to know why it's used that way. Next question. I believe this is the beginning of verse 30, where he says to him, meaning Jethro says back to Moses, I won't go. But he uses the same word, that I will go to my land. Now, what's the Kli Yakar bothered? He says, V'yomer lo elech, I won't go, ki'im el artzi elech, but to my land I will go. Tarti elech lamali. Why is the word I will go, even though in one time it says I will not go, but the same verb of going is used twice? Couldn't the verse just simply left out one of them? Here I'm not going, but there I will. Something to that effect. Now it is a distinct sentence within that sentence. In other words, if you look under, we're looking at verse 30 where it says, V'yomer elav lo elech. There's an upside down wishbone which has a distinct, it's like a colon or semicolon. It's a really hard comma. It's a whole thought. He said, I'm not going to go, meaning with you. But where will I go? So we have to this is going to help us, once we understand what the word lech is in distinction between lech and nosea, then the whole puzzle will be solved, because we'll understand what lech means and why he says, I'm not lech with you, but I'm lech over there. It's back to my people. I know you got to have a lot of patience, and the curiosity is going to kill the cat. You just can't. You just can't wait. But anyway, then he asks another question. Mal sha'amar, what does it mean in verse 29, where it says, Diver tov al Yisrael? So we don't know that much about Hebrew, right? We'll admit that. So it says, the Lord has spoken of good fortune for Israel. That's a very nice translation. The Art Scroll says, for Hashem has spoken of good for Israel. Okay, so according to the Kli Yakar, he says what it should have said was li Israel. The good was done to Israel. It was done for Israel. What is the word al Israel? What does that mean? I would have, the good done upon Israel. That would have been a simple explanation, but he's going to go into it much further. What does the word al actually mean? And how would that be a way to convince Yisro to come along with the Jewish people? So here we go. We'll begin the next paragraph. V'nira. According to the Yakar, it seems that the language, lashon, the expression of halicha, lech, lecha, is noifa al tenuas reglaim levad. What does that mean? It means it's a movement of feet alone. It's simply lech, go, physically. Now I know what you're thinking. What about Avraham Avinu? Didn't God say, lech lecha, uproot yourself entirely? He did and he didn't. If you remember when we learned that Parashat Lech Lecha, that the Yakar expresses that God did not want to scare Avraham into thinking that he had to give up everything at once. In fact, it was more of a journey. As you progressed and physically started walking, then you're leaving your birthplace, right? There's a whole idea of, here I have it here in chapter, it's number 3 on the source sheet, Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. So God said to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha. First thing I want you to do is physically leave. And then leave from your birthplace, meaning it's the next hardest thing to give up. I'm going to start with what's easier. And then your birthplace is hard to give up, and then even your father's house. It's actually a whole progression. I'm not going to ask you all at once to give up everything entirely, but it's a physical movement at first, and slowly it's a spiritual transition as we go along. So let's go back into the Yakar, because I did jump ahead. All I mentioned was the halicha, the concept of halicha is a language or an expression that falls, meaning it's applicable to the movement of feet alone. Hamatikim es ha'adam mimakom lemakom. It's like an uprooting. It's a movement of a person from one place to another. But it's entirely possible, we all are aware of this, that even if the person actually physically moves to another place, let's say, for example, just theoretically, someone moved from Arkansas to Texas, or Texas to Arkansas, or they went all the way from Australia all the way to Hawaii or Texas or North Carolina. I mean, this is a big move, but where is their head? Their head is back from where they left, right? How many Americans come to Israel and their head is still back in America? So he says like this, it's entirely possible that even though the person went to another place, but it's entirely possible that his mind, his mental state, is still very much connected to the place from which he left. That's what halicha. Halicha is a physical movement, but not necessarily that you're taking your persona, your spiritual journey with you. You're still wandering about the old country. Behaloscha nesiya, but when it comes to, and I'm going to use the word journey, nesiya, it's ataka. It's a complete uprooting. You totally moved on, let's say. Kolelet legufo, this means physically. It includes any kind of physical movement or uprooting, as well as makshavto, as well as his thought process. Mikol v'kol, in its entirety. Kimitam zeh amar kadosh baruch hu Avram, and the Yakar points out this is exactly why God said to Avram in Genesis chapter 12:1. We're going to read also 12:9, but 12:1 God says lech lecha me'artzecha. What does that mean? That just in the beginning, it's a first move in your process. Ki b'hatchala vaday mastama da'i nafsho kishor bebeis aviv. There's no question that your soul is tied up with the house of your father. I'm only going to make that request at the end. I'm not going to spring it on you in the beginning. All right? God's merciful. I want you to get up and start moving. And then slowly, in steps or stages, will you relinquish your connection to your father's house. But that's like the third on the list. That's what the Yakar mentions. Now, in addition, at the end, meaning at the end of this little excursion from Ur Kasdim in his movement towards Eretz Yisrael, in chapter 12:9 of Genesis, it says, and Avram continually traveled southward. Look at the Hebrew. Vayisa Avram, it's true, Avram traveled, but he was haloch v'noseah. And holech is first, noseah is second, for a reason. Okay? The Yakar explains, Techila haya holech. At first, Avram was holech, physically moving, va'achar kach noseah, and only afterwards, because that's how the verse clearly says it, he was holech v'noseah. Only afterwards he was noseah negba, meaning he traveled further south. Now, this is a very interesting idea. It says, Ki nashahu Elokim et kol beis aviv. That it was Hashem who caused him to forget about his father's house. How? Through allowing him to go through these stages. And I want to point out that this is a very similar language. Look on number 5 on the source sheet, where in Genesis chapter 41:51, that Yosef named his firstborn son Menashe, in Hebrew Menashe, right? Menashe. Why did he name him Menashe? Because God caused me to forget two things. The second thing is all my father's house. That God has caused me to forget. Ki nashani. Okay? Ki nishani Elokim es kol beis avi. That's what God did and helped Yosef with. Meaning that would be the answer if anybody asked, how come Yosef didn't come back when he realized he was, could be free as a viceroy and inform his own father, hey, Dad, I'm alive, right? Because God actually prevented that from happening. He caused him to forget. That we'll deal with in those parshiot. But as a proof text that this is what's happening, that as you continue to move on your journey, you will eventually have these disconnections with your old lifestyle. Okay, let's go on. V'zeh she'amar, this statement that was made in the very beginning, it says, V'yomer Moshe lechovav. He's calling him chovav. What in the world is chovav? I think I have here on the Rashi, in the beginning, look on source 1 in Rashi. Right away, we learn that chovav is Yisro. Okay. And he had many names. Yisro was just one of them. Because through him a portion was added. Yeter is an appendage, something added. But rather here, why was he called Chovav? Because he loved the Torah. Okay? This non-Jew became Jewish. He converted because he loved the Torah. This is one of the reasons why he's called Chovav. Okay, let's continue in the Yakar. He says, Helimi menu shem Yisro. That means, Helim means like it's hidden. It's somehow, covered over. We don't know that this is Yisro. It's hidden. We only know through, logic, perhaps, through the oral Torah and whatever. Ki ulai yachshov. Now, this is the Yakar saying, perhaps, who we're talking about? Moshe? Perhaps Moshe thought like this. Shekashim gerim liyisra kasapachat. Okay, now this is very difficult to explain, because if you read the Gemara that he's quoting in Yevamos, you will definitely come to the wrong conclusion. You will come to the wrong conclusion. So make sure that you hear the rest till the end of this this point. Okay. This is what happens when someone comes to convert. The Gemara analyzes a brisa. The master said, with regard to a potential convert who comes in front of the court in order to convert, you know what the judges say to him? Well, what did you see that motivated you come to convert? Fair enough. They inform him of some of the lenient mitzvahs and some of the stringent mitzvahs. So the Gemara says, what is the reason that they're going to, the based in, the court is going to say this to him? And you know why? It makes sense. Look, if the guy or girl is going to withdraw, let them withdraw now, right? It sounds too hard, right? Let them withdraw from the process. And if they want to continue, let them continue. So, Rabbi Chelbo, this is the important part. This is the part we're quoting. He says converts are as harmful to the Jewish people. Now, it really says kasheh. They're very difficult. That's the correct translation. They're very difficult to the Jewish people as a leprous scab. Now, the word safachat, you have the word, the safachat is like a lesion like in leprosy. So it is something that is attached to the skin, but it's an attachment. And let me explain now, because we're going to go into Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1, just to show you a proof text. As the convert shall join himself with them, and they shall cleave v'nispachu to the house of Jacob. So this idea they will, in Hebrew, v'nispachu is similar to the word safachat. They're joining. It's an appendage. Now, the truth of this concept is not as you read it, not as you think. There is difficult to the Jewish people as something that's an appendage. Now, what happens? Converts by nature take this thing seriously. So seriously that Jews who take it for granted look at the convert and says, wow, you're so religious. You're making me look bad. I mean, you understand that you are doing things right. And when you do things right and you actually know there's a God and you fear there's a God and you love this God, how does that reflect on me who maybe didn't even think twice about it? Maybe I think about it. But how serious you made the decision. You gave up everything. What did I give up? We're going to talk about that. I left Egypt. I was so happy to leave. I'm not looking back. What was there? The cucumbers, the onions? I mean, come on. I got nothing back there. I got no family. I got nothing. We didn't, So you are what we call an ideal example of what it means to be a Jew. And I, around you, look bad. Okay? I don't look so good. That's what it means. That's pshat. Okay? So, let's go back to the Yakar. And he mentions Kikol Yeter Kenitul Dameh. Now he's quoting a Gemara from Chulin, which is very strange, but I want to explain it. So we learned in Gemara Bechorot, so if an animal has 5 legs, or it only has 3 legs, that's considered a blemish. Now, we're actually talking about the difference between a front leg or a back leg. So in the front, if they had either 3 or 5, well, altogether, the extra leg was in the front. So what's the problem? So that would be a blemish that would be, I could not bring that to the temple for a sacrifice. But what about a back leg? If the back leg was either missing or an extra one, so then that would be considered treif. In other words, it wouldn't be kosher to eat. But the Gemara says it's as if it's removed. So we have this idea, if it's extra, it's good. Don't think like that. Just because extra doesn't mean it's good. Okay, so we're talking about the word Jethro. Why did Moses change his name to Chovav instead of Yeter? Yeter implies, it's nice that you're along the ride with us, but you're just like an extra. You don't even have a place in the land. And that's not the right attitude that a Jew should have towards a convert, but rather chovav. Rather, you know what? We need you. You know, not like, oh, you're coming because Nebuch, you need us. No, we actually need the convert. And here, let's hear it out. He says, Al Shem Zehu Nikra Yisro, meaning the extra appendage. The Imkain Mistama Lo Yakrivuhu Karoi. And if he felt like he was just an appendage, he wouldn't really feel close to the Jewish people in a proper way. Al Kain, therefore, Moses goes out of his way and actually changes his name to Chovav, or calls him Chovav. Why? Shina Shemo min Yitro lechovav l'rmoz lo al mashenemar, to actually show him the truth, to hint to him what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 19. V'yahavtem es hager. You have an obligation. It's one of the 613 commandments. And how many times is this concept mentioned in the Torah? 36 times. No less than 36 times. There's even an opinion that says it more through other hints. That what? You shall love the convert. You shall love the stranger. Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. For you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. Okay. Now, shahaya chaviv aleim. You want to bring them close? This is how you should approach them. Now this is why Moses had in his mind to convince his father-in-law to come with them. That's very nice. Come with us. But he says, no, simenachnu, we're journeying. We, the Jews, we're journeying. When it comes to the Jews, we think of ourselves as journeying. Nikra Nesiya, listen to this. Why are we on the journey? Minamakam asher yatsu misham. We left, right? We're traveling away from where the place that we came from. We left Egypt. We ain't going back. We had nothing there. Ki ein lanu sham nachala v'kerem mishpacha. We had no real estate, right? We had no vineyards or farmland. We had no family. We left through and through. You know, my wife always points out to certain Jewish women, she says, wow, that lady, she left Egypt and she ain't going back, right? This woman is freedom all the way, right? So there ain't no looking back. If you right? But for a convert, they may have, and in most cases they did, have a very good family life. Maybe they have wealth. Maybe they have family, whatever it is. They obviously have what normal people have, right? So they're giving up a tremendous amount. Amnam legave didach. So what was Moses saying regarding you, Jethro, Yisro, nikra halicha me'artecha o mimiladetecha? You know, as just like God said to Abraham, lech, so too, Moses was using the same strategy. I think you probably have a big, strong connection to Midian. So I'm only asking you to lech itanu. Right? I don't expect you to have given up everything. So nevertheless, what I, Moses, am requesting of you is l'cha itanu. Come with us. V'heitavnu loch. It's going to be good for you. Right? Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. Because God spoke good. Now we have to go back to the actual language here. For God has spoken of good fortune for Israel. So perhaps what Yisro's thinking, you're only promising me physical good stuff, right? You're asking me to physically go, and you're saying that God is good for Israel, meaning they're blessed, and I will get the same physical blessings. So, third line down, it says, Ratzo Lomar, what was Moses really trying to say to him? Tzivo lanu lehetiv imi shemedabek bano. That Moses was admitting, we're commanded, the Jew is commanded, right, to do good with anyone who is what? Clinging to us. Because you're physically clinging to us, we have to be physically good with you. So it says, V'shayek b'zel lomar, that's why the word Al Yisrael is used. Remember we asked, why does it say Al Yisrael, not Li Yisrael? So he uses that verse in Isaiah chapter 14:1. Let's go back to number 9 on the source sheet. It says, right, the Lord shall have mercy on Jacob, and again choose Israel, and he shall place them on their soil, and the stranger shall accompany them, and join up. Look at the word, nispachu al beis Yaakov, that they're joining as an appendage. Even nilva hager, right? When it says the stranger shall accompany them, it's sort of like just an entourage, like you're not really part of the Jewish people, and that's really a problem. So the word al implied that as well. So it's seemingly what Moses was saying. Look, just come with us physically. I don't expect you to make that full transition of giving up your entire past so easily. So that's, then he ends like this, Kilashan al, that language, the expression of al, is mishamesh al tosefet sha'ala ikar. It's something that's just additional to the prime. It's an appendage, okay? Let's go on to the next paragraph. V'yomer elav lo elech. If you recall in the beginning, we said that, yes, Yisro said, regarding what you're saying, to go with you, with you I'm not going to go. But if we're thinking of the word elech, as we said, I'm not going to go with you physically, what Yisro was saying, I'm much more than that. I'm not saying that he's comparing himself to Avram, but in the end, we're going to see that he was probably more advanced spiritually at this point than Avram Avinu, which is a very hard thing to say. But it seems like the Yakar is saying that. Because he says, with you I'm not going to go. I'm not prepared just to physically go. You got me, hook, line, and sinker. I'm ready like never before. Ki chorah. The word is clarity. It was absolutely crystal clear to Yisro. Shehiz kilo lashon halicha, that when Moses used the word lechitanu, just physically walk with us, lechashdo, that Moses had this suspicion, shemakshavto adayin meshotetet bi'arto b'makom miladato, that Yisro's mind was still traveling around his original place, like Midian, and his place, his land, and his birthplace. But you know what the truth is? Ki be'emet hayisa Torah kol kach haviva olav, that the Torah was so endearing. He loved the Torah so much. Ad shei misalek afilu makshavto, that Yisro had no thoughts of his homeland, of his birthplace. He gave that up entirely. Well, what do you mean? He's saying, I'm going back there. He's saying, I'm only elech there. I'm only physically going back there. That's how the right? That's how the verse ends. Ki'im el artzi ve'el moladati elech, in verse 30. But rather to my land and my family I'm going to go. Listen to what the Yakar says. Haylo cheshek mikol v'kol lidabek b'shchina. That what Yisro wanted to do with all of his cheshek, with all of his desire, in its entirety, was to cling to the divine presence. And that's when he says, so I'm not going to physically go with you, but rather to my homeland, I am only going to physically go. Ze Yakar alicha, that's a physical walking. Keshe'elech el artzi, because you know the real reason, drum roll please, the real reason, go ahead, do the drum roll, there you go. The real reason I'm going back to Midian, legayer et b'nei mishpachti, I'm going back to convert them. I am all in with the Jewish people. And I still care about my family, but not in the way you think. I care about their souls. You think I'm only there for the physical? Ki azvadai tamid tihye machshavti mishotetet b'makom kodesh zeh. He says, then for certain, it will be constantly on my mind as I wander about. Over there, my mind is wandering over here in this holy place. I may physically be in Midian, but my mind is here with you. Asher nafshi kshurabo, in which not just my mental state, my emotional state, my spiritual state, my psychological state, my entire mind is wrapped up with you guys. My physical body may end up traveling to Midian, but I'm in it all the way. So let's continue on to the next paragraph. V'yomer al no, he says, please don't ta'azov otanu. Please don't abandon us. Don't leave us. Don't forsake us. Me'olam lo chasharaticha shebeshuvcha lebeitcha tishkach ma'amad hakodesh hazeh. This is going to be a whole new eye-opener. What was going on in Moses' mind that he's asking? At first, if I told you, right, you're a ger or you're a potential convert, and I treat you like, you need us. We don't need you. That we already saw that's inappropriate. In fact, it's the other way around. Well, guess what? It's so much the other way around. We need you. We need you because you are actually our role model. So much so that if you abandon us, we're going to be lost. We have no way to fix ourselves without you being a role model. Let's see. Me'olam, so it means, forget it. Really, there was no suspicion that you were not going to return to your house and forget about this holy convocation, a holy people that you attached yourself to. So Moses is not saying, don't abandon us because I don't think that you're not going to come back because of whatever reason, but rather, da'agti, you know what I was worried about, Moses is saying? I'm telling you what I'm worried about. You got intimate. You knew these people. You knew how we were in the desert. Remember, every time we encamped, it was v'yachanu in plural, meaning because we always had complaints and maklokas, arguments, and disturbances. You saw how, I'm going to use the word evil, how not perfect we were. You saw how imperfect we were. You saw our warts and everything, our scars. The kol haniyotem bitaromes maklokes utluna. Right? Every single, you saw this with your own eyes, Yisrael. I'm worried that on account of this, you're not going to come back. That's why I'm afraid you're not going to come back and join us. Not because you're so attracted to something of your past and your house, your family, but because of the disgust you must have for us. That's why he says, Al no, please don't, ta'azov otanu, us. Don't leave us. The word milat otanu is chatam al kol inyan. That's what is the whole concept. You're leaving us. Who is us? Meaning to say, Bo Lomar, it comes to say, Yarei ani, Moses is saying, I'm afraid, Pentiyeh ha'aziva me'otanu, that you're going to leave us. Ki al ken yedata chanotenu b'midbar. In verse 31 we said, inasmuch as you know, intimately, yedata, our encampments in the desert. Just to re-emphasize this idea. When we were in the desert, it was v'yachanu, they encamped. But when one time, Erev Shavuos, like whether it's 3 days or 6 days, right before Shavuos, it says, v'yachan Yisrael, Israel encamped. One singular Israel encamped. V'yachan is singular. And Rashi says, Ki ish echad b'lev echad. We, before receiving the Torah, we were absolutely unified. But it could have been the only time in the 40 years we were in the desert that we were actually unified. What happened all the other times? Fighting, complaining, more complaining. Okay, so Moses is thinking to himself, right? And in fact, that's what Rashi says. He says, Kamo sharash, kamo shperish Rashi. Now Rashi says, Allah sheyedata chanotenu. Now that's interesting because that's all that Rashi says. I mean, that's what I'm bringing down for a reason. I'll show you which Rashi. In source number 2, in chapter 10 of Numbers, this is the comment on, I'm not sure which verse. You're familiar with the encampments in the desert. I think that's verse 31. Rashi says, it's fitting for you to do this, to remain with us. It's roy for you to remain with us because you are familiar with the places in which we will camp in the desert. Now, I just want to stop there, even though Rashi continues, this idea of what we just mentioned about he saw the evil side of us. And that's enough to want to run away. Okay. Let's continue. Let's go back to that statement, the last statement we said. Rashi says, Al asher yedata chanotenu. But the Yakar continues and he says, Shekol chaniyot. Not only did you know intimately our encampments, but all the encampments, there were these complaints on the Shekhinah. Shesara me'achrei Hashem, that we turned away from God. Al ken ani doeg. So Moshe is saying, I'm afraid. This is what I'm worried about. Pen lo yashuv aleinu. You're not going to come back to us. Af belektecha imanu. That even if you do go with us, tie makshavtecha al eretz moladeticha leimor. Even if you do come with us, I'm still afraid that your mind will wander back where you came from thinking it's much better. It's much better in Midian. There's peace there at least. Here with the Jews is like turmoil, right? Kimi tein li ever ki yona ayufa v'eshkona b'shalom shama. Like, who's going to give me a wing of a Yonah, of a dove, and I'm just going to fly and I'll dwell in peace there? Ki chaniyot halalu, because when it comes to these encampments by the Jews, shem b'taromes ka'amor. They're difficult, to say the least, as we already said. Lechein ani mevakesh. Therefore, Moses is coming back and saying, this is the reason I'm requesting. Shafilu otanu al ta'azov. Even us don't abandon. Ki bezetim mezake arabim. And this is another drum roll. Drum roll. There we go. That through this, by you staying, this is mezake arabim. Mezake arabim means you're causing merit to us. You're bringing us merit. How are you, the non-Jew, bringing merit to us by hanging out and staying with us and not leaving? The Eine Kol Yisrael, because all the eyes of the Jewish people, you Eilecha, they will be looking at you. Their eyes will be towards you, Lilmod Kal V'chomer Mimcha, to learn a fortiori argument. What's a logical argument? As I mentioned before, that you gave up everything. Remember, we had no problem giving up Egypt. Who would want to be there? Right? Even today, who would want to go back to Egypt? But we gave up nothing. You gave up everything. So this should mean something to us. So we should learn from you. She'im ata azavta eretz moladeticha usraratecha. You abandoned your land where you were born and all your authority. And you came and you attached yourself to the divine presence. Kal v'chomer Yisrael, how much more should we? Zeu sh'amar, now that's why it says in the end of that verse, Hayita lanu le'inayim, right? You will be for us a scout? No. You will be for us a guide? No. That our eyes will be towards you. Zchuta rabim yu taloi bach, that in order to bring a greater level, Zake Harabim, to bring the merit of the community to a higher level, it's because of you. Now, the next paragraph, V'hoya ki telech imanu. He says, and it will be that if you do go with us, ki iker tzarech davar zeh, the fundamental concept of this necessity is biyotecha holech imanu, that we want you to physically go with us, but also machshavtecha umoshotetet be'eretz moladeticha, that we're expecting that when you go with us, and we're thinking that your mind's going to be elsewhere, perhaps back where you came from. Birotcha kilkul haseder shebeinenu, and when you see all the difficulties, deficiencies, us causing ourselves problems, alkein ani tzrichen biyoter etcha, that's when we actually need you the most. The worse we get, the more we need you. Kedei lezachu tarabim, in order to bring us to a higher level. V'haya hatov asher yitiv Hashem imanu. Now remember, when we looked at the difference between verses 29 and 32, he's going to point out, I think he's going to point out this time. No, not yet. Okay, but let's look at 32, when it says that Haya tov asher yitiv Hashem imanu. Right? Then, if you go with us, then we will bestow good on you, the good that God granted us. Al yesher ma'asenu. That means what you're causing us the good stuff that God's actually giving us. In other words, because you're the cause for us to improve our actions, that's why God is granting us good, and that in return we're going to give to you. It's really yours. Okay, I'll say it again. I see some confusion. All the good, we're going to bestow on you the good which God gives us. Because God is giving us the good because you caused us to be better. So since you caused us to be better, God gave us more, we're going to give you more. It's really yours. Okay, is that clear? Okay, and that's what he says. What does it mean? Heitavnu loch. We're going to be good to you. Umilshchecha, umishilcha yitnu lecha. The goodness that we're giving to you is what you gave to us. Okay? In other words, our good is because of you. See, after the fact that it was you who were the siba, the cause of our ability to fix ourselves. We fix ourselves because of you. And in return, that's good for us. God's going to grant us more. Schus harabim teloy. Therefore, what is schus harabim? It means you're bringing the majority, the masses, to a higher level. That's what the ger does. Im kain, and this is how the Yakar ends this paragraph. What's Moses saying? You're the best guy for the job. Im kain mi yochol mi yachush lechutz mimcha. Who else is capable or even sensitive enough to do such a thing? Only a guy like you. Vashatak Yitro. That's why Yitro was silent. And then Moses pleaded again on his request. V'neter lo. That's why Moses requested. Remember the question was, what could Moses be trying to convince? Let me ask you, if your father-in-law wanted to move in with you and live with you and travel with you, you'd probably say, hey, Dad, listen, go get an Airbnb, we'll see you on the other side of town. Like, go back to where you came from. Moses is pleading with his father-in-law to come along, right? Because the Schut Rabbim is so great. Because what this particular type of a ger, a true ger, a ger tzedek, a true convert could bring to the Jewish people is unmeasurable. Okay, now we're on the last 8 or 9 lines. Uderek pshuto, in its most simple fashion, the way to understand. Mitchila hivticho betoyva gufanit. Originally, Moses promised him physical reward, right? He promised him something of a physical nature. That's when he says in the beginning, in 29, Heitavnu lecha, or Havtavnu lach, right? It's going to be, we will be good to you. V'lo hiskir Hashem. Do you see the name of God when he promises him anything in verse 29? No. I mean, the name of God appears in the verse, but when it comes to us granting you any good, ve'tavnu lach, we will be good to you. But when you go down to 32, it says, then we're going to bestow on you the good which God grants us. Keep this in mind, 1 second. He says in the first promise, God's name isn't mentioned. This, Yitro did not want to accept. He was not interested in the physical benefits. Lo ratzah lekabel. Lo manyen li. It doesn't interest me. What interested him was spirituality, a closeness with Hashem. That's why he says, Elech lo artzi. He says, El artzi. He says, I'm going to my land. V'sham yeli tova harbe. When I physically go to my land, it's going to be great. They got Walmart, Target, which I don't know if people go to anymore, but you got all these great places to shop. So I got that in Midian. Achar kach hivticho b'toiva ruchanit. But the second promise that Moses gives to him, remember we asked, how can the second promise be greater? God's name is included in that promise. It's of a spiritual nature. Shem miklal ha-Sanhedrin. Now what does that mean? It was all, ready for this? Yisro's descendants sat on the Sanhedrin. I have here, towards the end, just for an example, look at number 10 on the source sheet, Numbers 15:24. What does it mean, me'enei ha'edah? It's because of the eyes of the congregation, it was committed, some sin was committed inadvertently. We're talking about who are the eyes of the congregation? That's the Sanhedrin. And this verse is dealing with where the Sanhedrin made a wrong ruling, b'shogeg. They made a mistake in their ruling, and in the end, it could be that the Jewish people worshipped idols. So there's a special offering brought by the Sanhedrin. If you look at Rashi, it says over there, if because the leaders, literally the eyes of the congregation, caused this transgression, and it was committed inadvertently, meaning the leaders erred, and they said it was actually permitted to do idol worship when it was not. So anyway, we understand that the eyes of the congregation are the Sanhedrin. And if you turn the page, number 11, it's Talmud Bavli, Sanhedrin 106a, halfway down. By the way, there were 3 advisors to Pharaoh. You had Bilam, you had Yitro, and you had Job. Right? So Bilam said, yeah, wipe out the Jewish people, throw the babies into the Nile. And we all know what happened to Bilam. And then Job, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, he did the right thing in terms of protesting, but his protest was silence, and therefore his punishment to a certain extent for that was to scream out and suffer afflictions. But Yisro ran away. That was his protest. So if you go down halfway, it says, in Yisro who fled after he disagreed with that council, and Pharaoh sought to kill him, his descendants were privileged to sit as scribes in the session with the Sanhedrin in the chamber of the hewn stone. And there's a couple of verses to prove. Firstly, you can start with Judges 1:16. We know the Kenites. The Kenites are the tribe of Jethro. And regarding the Kenites, if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 55, it mentions these are the people who were the scribes of the Sanhedrin. They were the Kenites. Okay, so let's finish off the Yakar. He mentions that the promise that Yisro was more interested in was a spiritual nature, and the promise was that his children would end up being part of the Sanhedrin. And we'll turn the page, the last few lines, like it says, Hayiti lanu le'inayim hayita. When Moses says you were a scout or a lookout, he wasn't talking about that. It was even though it's hayita is past tense, but the vav makes it future tense. It's somewhat prophetic that your descendants will be sitting on the Sanhedrin as the eyes of the people. And then it says Zohaya tov asher yitev Hashem imanu, right? The good which God gives to us, we're going to give to you. Hizkir Hashem, God's name is mentioned in this promise. B'toiva ruchani teim azu. This is of a spiritual nature, the goodness of the spiritual aspect of this relationship. Ki yiten Hashem es rucho olav v'netar lo. That God would give him a spirit, a spirit would descend upon Yisro, and this was the answer that was, well actually here it means that he requested again, v'kein haya, that's exactly what happened, according to Chazal in Sanhedrin, which I just quoted, Shebnei Yisro zachu v'yashvu b'lishkat gazis, that the children of Yisro merited to sit in the Sanhedrin, b'vada hayalo mehavtachat, and that's certainly within that promise where he says you will be, not just were, but you will be the eyes of the congregation. So what I'm going to, I think, we'll see, title this year, what every Jew needs to know about converts and conversion, and this is absolutely like 101. Before you start helping converts, before you start getting involved, know who you are, know what the whole concept of conversion. We just passed Shavuos. Every single Jew is a convert to Judaism. We all converted at Sinai, and hopefully we will all go through a process like Abraham, our forefather, where he went through a lech lecha, a process of, I'll call it conversion, but let's call it transformation and transcendental awareness to higher levels and higher realms. And B'ezrat Hashem, right, we should all learn more Torah that will change us for the better, so we can be more chesed, we can be more loving, kind people, metakin our own midos, fix ourselves, and by fixing ourselves, of course, we fix the world. And with that, I will say Shabbat Shalom, have a great Shabbos, and a great life. And we'll see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem.
Yitzion temane, Yesham Hashem.